Okay, so today is all about speciation. So what do we hear in the word speciation? Species, okay? So how do we know that two organisms belong to different species? Up here, prime example, we have a house cat and a bobcat. Are they the same? No. What do we know about a house cat, a common house cat?
They're fluffy and they hunt rats.
Okay, I like it. And what, but where do they live? In a house, typically. Some might be indoor, outdoor, but typically in a house, right? What about the bobcat? Okay, they live in the wild. All right, up here, we have two different elephants. We've got an African elephant and an Asian elephant. What do you see?
Difference in skin.
Okay, so different sizes, I heard. What else? Skin. Okay, coloration. What else?
Tusks.
The tusks, that's a good one.
Their ears and the trunks. One of them doesn't have a tail.
He doesn't look like he has a tail there, huh? And then their ears are different and their trunks are a little bit different, okay?
Why do elephants have tails? They're big enough. I mean, it's not really helping.
We'll talk about it. All right, next is a chimp and a human.
Oh, everything. We evolved.
Okay, a chimp and a human.
A lot. Quite a bit.
All right, so some terms that we've already talked about, but how do natural selection and genetic drift lead to the formation of new species or speciation? So speciation is the formation of a new species. So natural selection, we talked about what? What's the other term we used?
Strong. That's what tree. It's that thing in the beginning, right? No.
What else?
Family tree.
We talk about with natural selection.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
How did I not know that?
All right. So a species is a group of organisms that breed with one another and produce fertile offspring. We need to make sure that we understand this. So if we have two horses, they can breed and they produce fertile offspring. So that means that they belong to the same species. So two horses, everybody see that? So two horses breed and they produce fertile offspring. Therefore, they belong to the same species. Now, we've got two donkeys. Two donkeys can produce or can breed and produce fertile offspring. So that means that those donkeys are the same species. Okay? So two horses, they breed, produce fertile offspring, same species. Two donkeys breed, produce fertile offspring, same species. But now, if we were to take a horse and a donkey, they can breed, but their offspring are sterile. And that means that they are not the same species. Because what does it mean to be sterile?
Oh wait, no, that's sterile. It's like if you had a rat and a mouse, then they have a.
All right, so I just said a horse and a horse. They breed and they make what?
Different. A mule.
All right, y'all. A horse and a horse breed and they make a what? A horse.
Yeah.
So they're the same species because their offspring is fertile.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you
Okay. A donkey and a donkey breed, they make a donkey and a donkey is fertile.
Yeah.
So therefore it's the same species.
Yeah.
But now we take a horse and a donkey, their offspring is sterile. So what does sterile mean? Infertile. That means that they
Not the same. They can't reproduce.
they can't reproduce.
Wait,
Okay?
mule
So
and
if you are fertile means that you can reproduce. If you are infertile or sterile, that means you can't reproduce.
they cannot have
So-
this.
A donkey and a horse can make a mule, but the mule is sterile. So the mule can't have other mules. Okay? It cannot reproduce at the end of the day. So that means that a horse and a donkey are not the same species.
Alright, I mean,
So let's think here. Same species or different species? Two cows have fertile children together.
same.
A lion and a tiger mate to produce a liger. Different. Horses cannot breed with elephants. They're obviously different, yes. All right. So now one of the last things we're going to talk about. So when species are isolated, okay, for a long period of time, they become so different that they can no longer interbreed. So now a new species is formed. And that is what we said is known as speciation. Okay? So if a species is isolated for a long period of time, eventually they're going to become different, because if they're isolated, what do they have to do to their environment?
Yeah.
They have to be able to adapt, to be able to what? Survive and reproduce. Okay? So speciation can happen in one of three ways that we're going to talk about. The first one is behavioral isolation. Behavioral isolation is when two populations are capable of interbreeding. So they can interbreed, but they have differences in courtship rituals. So what I mean by that is you have an eastern and a western meadowlark up here. Okay, they can interbreed, but they're typically not going to interbreed because they have different songs, different mating calls. So they're not going to attract one another. Okay, so that's behavioral isolation. The second one, and probably the most common that you would see, is geographic isolation. So this is when populations are separated by barriers such as rivers, mountains, or different bodies of water. Okay, so if a river, a mountain, or a body of water separates species, they eventually become different species, because natural selection is going to work on each group separately and therefore differently, because they are going to live in what? Different environments. Okay, so they need to be able to adapt, to be able to survive and reproduce. Okay, so genetic changes that occur in one of the groups is not necessarily passed on to the other. Okay, so that barrier causes speciation. So behavioral isolation, geographic isolation. The last one is temporal isolation. This is when species reproduce at different times. So, for example, the wood frog reproduces between March 1st and mid-April, okay? April 1st, actually, looking at the graph. And then the leopard frog reproduces from mid-March to May, okay? So therefore, because they reproduce during different months, different times of the year, okay, they're technically going to never interact with one another. So therefore, we're going to have speciation. Okay, so behavioral courtship rituals, geographic, separated by a barrier, and last is temporal, which means they reproduce at different times. So let's think about these. Will speciation occur? A population of frogs is separated by a flood. Okay, because they're going to be isolated, right? A population of rabbits lives on the same island. No, they're not separated. We're not talking about any kind of isolation. A river too deep to cross separates a population of horses. Yes. Two populations of birds develop different courtship rituals. If we have a different courtship ritual, okay, different songs, the eastern and western meadowlark, okay, eventually they're going to be different. Two populations of lizards mate at different times of the month. Yes. Okay.